Hello everyone, my name is Mollie Pugmire and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be with you all today, so thank you so much. So currently I work for All We Can, which is an international development agency with historical links to the Methodist Church here in Britain. My role is to be their communications and advocacy officer, and I've been in this post since January. Before that, I spent 18 months working for the campaign Climate Justice for All. If any of you know me or recognise me at all, it's probably because of that. Me and my colleagues spoke to you all last year, and we were really grateful for the support that the World Federation of Methodist and Uniting Women gave us over the course of that campaign, so thank you so much to all of you. For those of you who don't know, Climate Justice for All, which sometimes was shortened to CJ4A, was a youth-led campaign which sought to mobilise the global Methodist family on issues of climate justice in the run-up to COP26. COP being the United Nations annual climate change conference, and COP26 happened last November after being postponed for a year because of COVID, and it took place in Glasgow, Scotland. The team behind this campaign was me, James, who's also from Britain, Irene from Italy, Jessica from Zambia, Mima based in Fiji, and Camilla from Uruguay. So to mobilise the global Methodist family in the run-up to COP26, we took advantage of the global nature of our team and the large network of volunteers that we had, and decided that we could tell the stories of communities who were deemed to be climate experts by experience, or who were spearheading within their own communities climate action. So to tell these stories, from April 2021 until November 2021, we release monthly short films and worship resources, each telling the story of different communities from all over the world. These can still be accessed on our website, which is at worldmethodistcouncil.org/CJ4A. And then if you go onto our resources section, all of the stuff is there. Alternatively, all of our films are still available on our YouTube channel. Telling these stories was really important to us because we felt that as a global community, the Methodist family needed to be aware of what was really going on across the globe. And we needed to honour one another by hearing the stories of people who were facing the effects of the climate crisis today, or as I said, taking climate action. And although these stories were sometimes really tricky and really difficult, that reality was really, really important. So to accompany these, as I said, we had worship resources, and these invited communities to dig a little deeper into the issues that the films explored. And they also a really wonderful opportunity to kind of hear prayers and sermons and creative kind of pieces written by Methodists, and very often young people who were worshipping in different countries to ourselves, which I think was such an asset to the campaign. So during the campaign, some of our really talented volunteers came to us and told us that they had written a song about climate justice for all. So we commissioned them to go get the song recorded properly, and we made a music video to accompany it. So to close this sort of introduction section, I'm going to play this song, and I hope that it gives you a little bit of a flavour of the heart of the campaign.
Our ask to the global Methodist Church.
We believe in climate justice for everyone. We have paid the price for more families. Now we're part of the bigger picture. We have committed to be part of the change, as we call our own ambassadors, just to make the climate justice possible for everyone.
Droughts, heat waves, cyclones, floods, rise in sea levels. All these problems are due to the changes in climate, and the world is at stake. The Climate Justice for All is calling to all the global Methodist family to know that we are part of this crisis. We believe in climate justice for all. Let us conserve our environment by protecting creation for the love of all. Let us use clean energy to save the future generations. Methodist youth are leading this movement globally to fight this crisis.
We have heard the cries from our families. Now we're part of the bigger picture. We have committed to be part of the change. As we call our own ambassadors, just to make the climate justice possible for everyone. We believe in climate justice for everyone. We have heard the cries from our families.
Why and affected by the crisis?
We have committed to be part of the change. As we call our own ambassadors, just to make the climate justice possible for everyone.
Together we stand, and we can create a better world.
A really significant reason that climate justice for all was shaped the way it was, and I think the intention behind the whole kind of campaign's creation in the first place was that we felt, and our steering group felt, that it was really, really important that the church was at the forefront of issues of climate justice. We felt that as church communities, we had a voice to speak into those places, but also that we were able to model the kind of global working and leadership that kind of embraced climate experts by experience, that embraced young people, that embraced people who were not conventional leaders. And so for us, being at the forefront of these issues was really, really valuable. And so I want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about climate and climate justice, and maybe where you're at with climate justice, before we take a deep dive into COP26 and the kind of the intricacies of what happened there. So just before we dive in, I want to invite you to take a moment to pause, to reflect on where you are currently with the climate crisis. So I'm going to read some reflection questions, and I just want to give you a few minutes just to mull these over, whether you might take some notes or you just kind of like let these questions wash over you. Do whatever works for you. So the first question is, what do you think when you hear the phrase the climate crisis? The second is, what are the things that you're currently doing within your own community to tackle the climate crisis, if any? Who are the voices that you're listening to on issues of climate justice? And where is your support coming from to sustain you as you take action? And that might not necessarily be climate action, but kind of any justice action at all. So obviously these questions I hope are just starting points, but obviously if you have any other thoughts, please just kind of like let yourself make some notes, think into them, dig into them, and we've got a few minutes to explore that. I hope that these are going to be really personal reflections. You're not going to need to share them at all, so do feel free to kind of be as honest with yourself as you need to. I just think that sometimes it's really important to check in with ourselves, especially when we're talking about issues of the climate. So to give you just a little bit of time to reflect, I'm going to play a video which is a music and dance piece that some of our wonderful volunteers from Uruguay made as part of the campaign. Again, this was a set of circumstances where we asked our volunteers in Uruguay to kind of come up with some content that we wanted to share, and they really embraced the creativity of their abilities within the group, and so came up with this beautiful music and dance piece, which translated into English, the title is called Life Force, and it's really beautiful and one that I keep coming back to. So I hope you enjoy this piece, and also it gives you a little bit of time to think. So I hope you enjoy.
Pulso de vida que corre entre cerros, que nace tan dulce, que viene del cielo, que cambia de estado, que moja los prados, que es vida y frescor. Sos savia en el árbol y el jugo del fruto, sos flora talada y fauna en peligro, la esencia del cuerpo que pide con fuerza que viertas tu don. Fuerza que brota entre las rocas, nutre tu pueblo y riega su voz, llanto del cielo, clama la tierra por libertad de la creación. Sustento del mundo en manos mercantes que riegan el hambre y cosechan la sangre, que niegan el cambio, lo sucio del aire por su producción. Agua de vida por Dios prometida, que vuelve y activa el ciclo de vida, que cambia los rostros de tu humilde pueblo cuando oyen tu voz. Fuerza que brota entre las rocas, nutre tu pueblo y riega su voz, llanto del cielo, clama la tierra por libertad de la creación.
La creación espera con gran impaciencia el momento en que se manifieste claramente que somos hijas e hijos de Dios.
Fuerza que brota entre las rocas, nutre tu pueblo y riega su voz, llanto del cielo, clama la tierra por libertad de la creación. Fuerza que brota entre las rocas, nutre tu pueblo y riega su voz, llanto del cielo, clama la tierra por libertad de la creación.
So as this session is in part to look back at COP26, I could sit here and tell you all about my experience of COP26, but I don't think that that would paint a very broad picture of what happened during those 2 weeks in Glasgow. So instead, I've invited my friend and colleague, Maima Vai, from Samoa, and she's based in Fiji, to reflect on the experience of COP26 with me. So I hope you enjoy this little segment and interview that I'm about to show you, and I hope that you really get some valuable insight and wisdom from her. She was really a gift to me over the 18 months that we worked together, and I hope that you can learn from her too. She has such a brilliant way with words and such interesting perspectives to give. So here is Maima and Mollie in conversation about COP26. I've introduced you before this section in the workshop, but just for the purposes of everyone getting to know you a little bit, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and say how you ended up working and being a part of Climate Justice for All?
Sure. Thank you, Molly, for this. So I I'm a climate activist that is based in the Pacific right now. And I was working for the Pacific Conference of Churches as their ecumenical enabler for ecological stewardship and climate justice, their desk. And so, well, besides that, I am also a Methodist from the Methodist Church of Samoa. And so when I was taken on by the Pacific Conference of Churches, the Climate Justice for All project had come up by the Methodist Church of Britain. And so they had then reached out to Reverend James, which was my line manager at the Pacific Conference of Churches, to see if they could find someone, Methodist basically, to come on board onto this project. And so because I was already in the Pacific Conference of Churches, they thought, well, okay, it would have been, I think it would be much easier if we just bring Maima along, and then from there she can then work with us in regards to preparations towards COP. And so that was how I was brought onto Climate Justice for All.
Yeah, and what a good thing that you were in the right place at the right time, Maima, because yeah, I'm so pleased that we got you. Yeah, we had such a good time. So the next question that I've got for you is like, what were your hopes and expectations for COP26, like before we got there? And you could be very honest.
Okay. Well, I think in terms of like change, there was a lot of hope and expectations that I, not just me personally, but collectively as the Pacific, we had wanted world leaders to take on. But at the back of our minds, we also knew it's a very far shot. So even though there were high expectations, it was also low as well. I think, and that it's been like that for the last decade or so, with a lot of these COP conferences. And I think it has also, because of that, it has built up a lot of the resilience of our Pacific communities in like not depending solely on these world leaders, but doing things and moving forward from our own, depending on our own selves to do it. The only thing that we're wanting these world leaders to do is actually to finally realize that like this is not some far-stretched 10 years into the future or 20 years into the future kind of decision making that they're doing. This is basically what will happen either next year, next month, or even the next day for us. Climate change is a constant, it constantly happens in the Pacific, and it's a really big reality for us right now. So with those expectations and those hopes, we're just, instead of more so depending on these world leaders to try and change, we're basically just trying to get them to wake up and see that this is our future that they're literally messing with.
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah. It definitely feels like, even from like the experience that I kind of got to have at COP with you and your friends from the Pacific, of like the dimension of the conversation is so different when you're talking about a present reality as opposed to a kind of like a future that might happen. Is like even the dynamic and conversation around the climate crisis, bringing together people who like, from people in Britain who are talking about this as an issue of the future, in conversation with people who are talking about this as an issue of today, right now, is like very interesting to kind of see how much learning there needs to be done by people. And so interesting. So you sort of touched on this a little bit already, but like, how did you and others in your like community find yourself like feeling in the run up to COP26? I know you talked a little bit about the kind of like in the back of your mind worrying about that. I wonder if you just want to say a little bit more about how that's kind of felt over, as you kind of mentioned, COP's gone by.
Well, I'm not going to lie, COP26 was one of the different COPs that the Pacific community actually had really big hope and faith in. We were really expecting COP26 to be the turning point. And so in the lead up to COP26, we had, even though COVID had happened and there weren't as many Pacific delegates that were able to travel out, we had made sure that those who were going, the Pacific delegates, to make sure that they were part of each different spaces, whether that would be within the blue zone or whether that would be within the decision-making space. But also, besides the Pacific delegates who were going, we also had a backstopping team within the Pacific. And so the backstopping team is those who could not travel, but they would be supporting from afar. So they would be working UK time just to make sure that if any of the Pacific delegates that were on the ground needed some documents or resources, that they were awake to help mobilize and send over, or just help out in general. And so with that collective effort, it's basically tried to, sorry, it's like really loud out here. So it basically, how would I say it? It brought in a different sort of, like the Pacific community was actually really ready to say like bring in our messaging, like this is what we want, this is what we want to see that's happening. And with that, they were really hoping that with this COP, it would be different from the others. And a lot of us were really, we had a lot of big discussions about this as well. And so when it did come to the outcomes of COP26, we were really, really upset about this. But in the end, it was actually a big win for us. There was a lot of events and a lot of messages, collective messages from the Pacific that had actually gone through, and people were able to actually take in, which is still a win for us. So although we did not get the expected outcome that we wanted, we were still able to get our message across and get these world leaders to then think, oh, okay, like processing the information and thinking, okay, maybe in the next COP, we'll see how it goes from there. But yeah, that's pretty much what had happened in the lead up to COP26 in the Pacific community.
Yeah, and even from like my experience of like working with you and it being in conversation and then run up to COP, and this was true for so many of our colleagues as well, was like it was so touch and go, wasn't it, as to who was actually going to be there in person because of COVID. And it's really easy to, because all of our team got there and everyone was fine the whole time, it's really easy to forget how much of a like struggle those last couple of weeks in particular of like, were people going to make it? Were people going to be ill? Were country, like there was so much in the run up to COP that was felt so much like either everything could happen or nothing. And to that on top of all the other kind of stuff that the Pacific were doing in terms of, as you said, like putting on this really strong front of bringing as many people and making sure that you had the right people in the right places to get that message out. It was like just so much stuff to think about before you even got there. So yeah, that can't have been easy at all. I wonder if you want to chat a little bit about how you felt as a Pacific Islander, as an Indigenous person at COP, and what being in that kind of like UN space was like. I know we talked about this a lot during the 2 weeks, but I wonder if you want to share some of that, because I've always found this really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I feel like as a Indigenous person within COP26, although I was really excited to be part of such a big global audience, I was also, I think as the days went by, tended to become a bit more fragile. And was cautious of where I would be stepping in the sort of spaces I would be stepping into. And so I don't know if you remember, but you do remember the stunt that we were part of.
Yeah.
And so with that stunt, so this stunt, just sharing it out, so they had wanted Indigenous people from frontline communities to be part of a photo shoot / protest in COP26 in the Blue Zone. And so with that, it was more so like people were coming, and then some of the people from the global north that were leading the stunt, they had just given us a costume, were telling us, okay, put it on, and then just go out and take photos, and that's it. And they had the whole script drafted, which was also kind of, to me, I was thinking, okay, you're wanting people, like Indigenous people from frontline communities, to be the face of this stunt, yet you're not really giving them a voice because you're drafting out the whole message.
Yeah.
And so to me, I was really disappointed in that. And when I had gone, and I felt like most I was just like something to be shown off to. So like I was a new shiny toy, just to get people's audiences. And I think within the sometimes, and I was speaking to Reverend James, my line manager, about this, COP26 can usually become like a circus in the sort of sense that because there's so much that's happening, people do tend to get caught up in a lot of different spaces. And so being an Indigenous person, sometimes there are spaces that are very beneficial, but then there also are spaces where people can sometimes exploit you just because you are from the front lines. And so with that, you really have to be cautious as to where you're stepping into, making sure that if you are stepping into that space or that event, what would be the benefits that are coming out of that for my community, for my people. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's basically, when you're traveling out there as an Indigenous person, you're not just traveling there as an individual, you're traveling there with your whole community. So you're representing not only yourself, but you're representing your family back home, your community, your country, as well as your ancestors as well. So anything that you're wanting to take part of, or the sort of space that you're wanting to step in, you have to be really cautious of that as well. But at the same time, you're wanting to make sure that you make the most of this opportunity, being part of a global platform and being given that voice to share stories of resilience, or stories of frontline communities from your own country to the world, and seeing like, this is not some lie or that's happening. It's actually our reality, and it's and we're wanting to make sure that we are entitled to a future in the next, not in the next 10 to 20 years, but actually in the next year or so.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of conversations, didn't we, over the course of COP, of like how much I just saw you, like people being like, Mima, do this, Mima, do that, like we want you here, we want you there, and like there was so much of stuff that I feel like people were really excited that there was like such a diversity of people there in terms of like all these indigenous people who could share things and tell things, but it sort of felt like there was such a, it felt like everyone wanted to push indigenous people to the front so that everyone could see them and they were highly visible, but it sort of felt like it wasn't on their terms. It was just, and we talked about this a lot of like, yes, but like with that script, for example, like you have to let actually it be led by the indigenous people, not just being like, you're going to come here and do this and then we're going to make sure you're at the front so people see you. It's more being like, how let's include you guys, like let's just do what you guys want to do and we'll make it happen. And I think that's tricky, isn't it? And like you said, if it's just tricky because people get really excited and there's so much stuff going on, and sometimes I felt very much that we were asking indigenous people to share at their expense, because I felt like I was learning so much and that was brilliant, but we were asking people to share really difficult stories and things about their community, but then being like, great, thank you, I'm really pleased that we got a photo of you at the front, like, okay, off you go, bye, thank you for saying all the things we wanted you to say, as opposed to really making space to listen and wrestle with that. And that's, yeah, there was a lot of moments where I was like, I just feel so uncomfortable because I could see it happening and being like, oh no, this is wrong.
Yeah.
So what, this is the next question. This might, we might be able to talk about this a little bit more, but what do you think we can learn from the mistakes that were made at COP26?
Okay. Let me think about this one and regroup on my. I think as a global collective, some of the mistakes that we can actually learn from is seeing that sometimes. Am I gonna get in trouble if I say something?
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, as a global collective, some of the mistakes that we can learn, especially with the outcomes of COP26, is seeing that sometimes these world leaders are basically more just about very profit-driven agendas. They're only there for profit, and so. Even though you're going there, you're trying to like get your message across, at the end of the day, they will always end up choosing profit. And so something I wanted to share this because it's actually, I had never known that. And then I actually was really shocked or surprised when we were at COP26, was that you're going to COP26 because you're wanting to get the message across of trying to phase out fossil fuels. And so, but at the same time, there are also other people that are also bringing in their own agenda and not in trying to push to not phase out fossil fuel. And so in the pavilion, you have different countries that are funded by environmental organizations or just a collective NGOs that are all putting together. And then you have Australia, whose pavilion box is funded by one of the biggest, oil industries.
Yeah.
And so with that, it was like, okay, that was a bit different. I think at the end of the day, sometimes what I've noticed is that although COP is like, you're going there and you're trying to like fight for your community, at the same time, you're going against 100 of these very coal or fossil fuel supporters saying, no, we still want this. Climate change isn't even that close. And so I think with the outcome that's coming, sometimes the momentum that you build, it can get lost along the way, because you sometimes feel like you're fighting against a whole pack of wolves, and you can't basically, you don't see anything winning, or you feel as though you can't make it. But you always have to be sure that you don't end up losing that sort of momentum, and you're continuing your fight for the future of your people. Say, for example, although that didn't turn out, if you're doing something and it didn't turn out the way that you wanted, you should still look at the small wins that had happened. So as I was mentioning it earlier in our discussion, how even though COP26, the outcome of COP26 did not turn out as what our Pacific community had wanted, we had still gotten a lot of wins in terms of some of the collective messages that had gone across, and world leaders taking that into consideration and processing that to build up and prepare for COP27 ahead. I think that's like the whole point of like a climate activist, is that sometimes the fight that you're doing is a very far long shot, but you don't give up on it. You don't lose hope on it. You just continue to do so. You look at the small wins that you have done and say, and each of those small wins, day by day, they end up creating to be a much bigger win in the end. So, yeah.
Okay, and then the last question, which ties in wonderfully to what you've just said, is what are your, like, looking ahead to COP27, obviously now not that far away, I guess, what kind of things are you kind of hoping for in there? And like, yeah, if you've got any hopes for actual COP, because obviously, as we've said, it's not all just about COP, and actually COP can be sometimes more unhelpful than it is helpful, but have you got hopes and expectations for COP27?
I think as a speaking collectively from the Pacific, our hopes are still the same hopes as we had last year and the year before that and the year before that. The only thing, I wouldn't really call it hopes, but I would say some of the goals that we're wanting as a Pacific is to make sure that we come back stronger. Make sure that we use the opportunity to bring out our stronger selves for our community at COP27. So whatever some of the wins that we had last year, we evaluate those and then see, okay, what can we do better in this one? And in the lead up to COP27 is also very important as well in terms of preparations ahead. Consultations with the different non-governmental organizations, as well as the government and stakeholders, and just making sure that everyone is on the same page, so that by the time we're getting there, communication has been across, and we're maximizing each of the different spaces and ensuring that there is a lot of Pacific representation, whether that would be in the blue zone or in the green zone, or even just out in the streets. Making sure that with that Pacific representation within those spaces, it can bring about a much stronger message for us to get these world leaders to finally wake up and take that into consideration. So, yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Well, those are all my questions that I had, Mima. So thank you so much for letting me interview you. I'm sure this has been so much more interesting than me just sharing my thoughts on COP. So yeah, thank you again to Mima for letting me interview her and for all of your wisdom. I'm so grateful to call you a friend as well as a former colleague. And And yes, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
So as I begin to draw to a close, I just want to say a really big thank you to Louise Wilson for inviting me to contribute today, but also to all of the World Federation of Methodist and Uniting Women and for their support throughout climate justice for all and beyond. Just because COP26 is over, and for me personally, because I don't work in my climate justice for all role anymore, doesn't mean we shouldn't be still thinking about how we can prioritise climate justice in all of the ways and in all of the spaces that we can. As I've said, my hope is that the church can be at the forefront of these issues, not lagging behind, and that only happens when communities rise up and take action together. I learned so much from working closely with the global Methodist family, and I know that you have the chance and opportunity to do that with the World Federation as sisters coming together from all over the world. So I encourage you to keep listening to your sisters, keep amplifying the voices of climate experts by experience, and keep asking questions of yourself, of your churches, and of your leaders. So just to bring our session today to a close, I'm going to read a prayer that was written by my colleague Irene, who was my colleague during Climate Justice for All, and she was from Italy. So I'm going to read her prayer because throughout all of our conversations about climate and climate justice, I always come back to this prayer because it's so beautifully written, and I think that it's really helpful. So let us pray. Lord Almighty, you are present in the whole universe and in every creature. Open our hearts with the power of your love, that we may protect life and the beauty of creation. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. God, help us to free the abandoned and forgotten. Fill us with hope, so that we may protect the world, our home, that we may see beauty, not pollution and destruction. Fill with love the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and of the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, so it may find the light given by your Holy Spirit. Let's remember that we are united with every creature. We thank you for being with us each day. Give us hope in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.